Hello, and welcome to our podcast, Perfectly Human, the podcast that helps you feel that we are all connected and whatever you're experiencing is perfectly human. My name is Angie, and I'm one of your hosts today.
And I am Rekha. Hello, Angie, and hello, listeners.
Hello, everybody. Yes. So today we have a special episode. We have an episode focusing on failure. And is failure our friend or foe? Yes. So we're going to talk about failure, what it
Yeah.
represents for us, the impact of avoiding failure, and how we can shift it. We can shift it to be from foe into friend, hopefully. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And how do we reframe it and learn from it, basically? So, why have we chosen this topic? Well, this is something that has come up for me all my life, actually, a time and again. And I'm sure it's something that, comes up for other people as well. But I also hear it from others. So it comes up for me, but I also hear it from my friends, family, and a lot of my clients where failure almost overtakes their life and it can become all consuming. And I think there's also something in this around how do we talk about failure to help us overcome the shame we feel when we fail. Um, I find that we don't talk about it as much. And there is a real benefit in talking about it because it helps us feel A, that we're not alone, and B, that actually failure is a normal part of life.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think that's incredibly important, Reka, because actually, when we share our failures, when we share things that don't go well, actually, there's potentially even
Yeah.
a lot more learning in there. And definitely, there's more connection, as you're saying. Yes. Okay. So, if
Yes.
we look for a moment about what do we mean by failure and why do we find it so hard? Yes. So, to be honest, failure means different things to different people. Okay. And it's funny, like I was telling Reka that I was talking to my son about the episode that we're going to record. And we were talking about it, like I'm saying, oh, we're talking about failure. And I'm like, what do you think you need to do to, about failure? And he says, well, just succeed more. So, yes. So, of course, many, many times
Yeah, that's
we really.
simple.
Yes, lots of times we really see failure as the total reverse of success, right? And it comes
Yeah.
with all these heavy feelings and everything that we feel about failure and success. And actually, we can recommend if you are interested in success. We did a whole episode, which was our very first episode. We talked about success. So sometimes we see failure as the complete opposite of success. Now,
Yeah.
I also like to look at it from where do we come from in life, right? So we are all motivated about different things. We are all a bit different. Um, some of us are a bit more kind of task orientated. Some of us are a bit more people orientated. So sometimes this can also give different angles to failure. So for a person who is more task orientated, um, a big emotion or a big feeling about the failure will be associated with not achieving something that they wanted to achieve. Okay. For those who are more potentially in the sort of the people camp, let's say, is more about the relationships, is about how they are going to be seen by others, is about that lack of validation, that rejection potentially that we think we will have from others if we are not successful. Yes. So
Yeah.
what do you think, Reka? What do you think? Why is failing so hard? Why do we find it so hard?
Well, I think we find it so hard, and I think I find it hard because sometimes it gets very roped up into my identity. So it's not that that thing failed; it's I failed, and I'm the failure. And I think we growing up, it was almost like if I did something well, that was oh, look at you, you did something well. It's like validation, it's success, it's love. And so it's almost like, I think we create these formulas in our minds, such as, um, if I fail, no one will love me. If I fail, I will be rejected. And if I fail, I'll be destitute. And I think that there's something in there, that we have this equation that if I fail, then this will happen. Um, and I remember when I first moved to Nairobi and I started my own business, and I remember my fear of failing was actually very crippling. I was so scared of failing, that it literally, it made me feel like I just did not know what to do. And I remember a good friend of mine saying to me, she's like, Rekha, if you do fail, she was like, you're not going to be destitute. And I was like, oh, that's true. So she's like, why are you so worried? And I think deep down there was a fear of that, but when she called it out, it was like, yeah, she was like, just do what you can, and let it just unfold and let it happen. And so I think there's this piece of either we catastrophize and um, think that the worst case scenario is going to happen if we fail. And I think the other thing is that it's about who I am. It's about my
Mm,
identity, that if I fail at this, then I'm not going to be loved. And actually, just saying that, one of the things that came into my head was like, oh gosh, it was my kids. Like, if I'm a failure, would my kids still love me? And of
mm.
course they will, but it makes me feel like there's a fear that what if they don't? Which makes me feel had quite a visceral reaction there actually with that.
Yeah, it's so
So yeah,
interesting how just saying it brings up the emotion, because again, our brain is responding to the actual emotion. So it doesn't matter if it's really happening or not. Is
yes,
what is happening for you, isn't
yeah,
it? Actually. So I see totally what you're saying. I think for me, the equation, growing up as well, for instance, is the amount of work, that relationship that you put between work and either success or failure, right? And I think it's an important one, because we really, once we have learned this, once I've learned this, you kind of replicate it to everything else in your life, right? Later on as an adult as well. So we replicate it in our careers. We can replicate it in different roles that we have in our life. So sometimes it's like, oh, if I'm failing, it's because I'm not working hard enough, or not putting
yeah,
enough work, or not creating enough action. Um, and yes, I think as we go through life, we also learn, or definitely I have also learned, that yes, there is percentage of that outcome that is your direct action and work and hard work, but there's also a percentage of, sometimes some things are just not happening, but
yeah,
maybe sometimes some things are not meant to happen, right? So we shouldn't always kind of put it down to our identity, as in, I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough, or to our action, I'm not doing enough, I need to do more, etc. So yes, these are the kind of the
yeah,
equations that we learned, right? So we have the equation: if I fail, nobody will love me, or people will think this of me. And we have the reverse equation, which is, if I am successful, I will be happy. If I am successful, I will be loved. If I am successful, I'll be accepted. Yes. So I think that is
yeah,
taking us to a place, Reka, where we really want to avoid failure at all cost, isn't it?
yeah, for sure. And it's so interesting how, like, a lot of people I work with, or some of my coachees, very much work really hard because they just don't want to fail. They're so avoiding failure that they work hard and too hard, almost at the expense of many other things. And I think it's, one of the questions I ask them often is, what would it be like if you didn't worry about failing? And the
Mm,
interesting thing is, and I don't know where I was reading it. It was like, I don't know, 90% or something of what we fear or failing with doesn't actually happen. And so but yet, we think about that a lot. And I was like, well, what if it succeeded? What if it did do well? And often our brain does not go there because we're working so hard to protect ourselves from failing that we don't think about the potential of success. Um, so I think that there's some questions that we can ask to really help reframe that, which we're going to talk a bit about in a moment as well.
Mm. Yes.
There's also, I think, some of the things that I wanted to just share with our listeners was there's a wonderful podcast called How to Fail by Elizabeth Day. So if somebody does struggle with failing or, want to be more comfortable with failing, it might be a good podcast to listen to. And I think, Angie, you were
Yes.
talking about a book that was written by Brene Brown.
Yes, so Brené Brown, who obviously talks a lot about shame, and as we have said,
Yeah.
there's a lot of emotions associated with failing. So she also has this book, Rising Strong, where she's talking pretty much about failure and sort of coming back from failure as well. So we can also recommend that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that you really want to just point out here is that, we don't want to fail, so we try to avoid it. Often avoiding it moves us more towards it, which is a bit of a, it's a bit annoying, but that does happen sometimes. And it's also to do with, this piece that often our brain, and I've heard this a lot, and it's been a lot of podcasts and talks, is that our brain doesn't understand the word don't, or,
Hmm.
so it moves towards what we actually avoid. So it's how do we focus on more thinking about what we're building, the success, and this, what we are achieving. Um, and just knowing that, reminding ourselves that we are doing enough. I think, what something that I want to share with our listeners is how do we shift failure from being our foe to our friend? How do we befriend it? And there are three key things that I'd just like to share. Is one of them is how do we reframe failure? So how do we start to see it as a gift? And information being sent our way, maybe to help shift what we're doing, and asking the question, what is the gift in this, or what is the learning? Where can I grow from this experience? I think that could be really valuable. So how do we use it as a potential to learn, rather than taking it as something that, oh my God, I failed and therefore I'm terrible, etc. And so recognize the emotion that you might feel with failure, but then look at the facts and look at, what can we do with it differently. So that's one thing I would really suggest. I think the second thing I would really think about is, or ask listeners to think about, is respect your unique journey. So failure is relative. And often we go back to constantly comparing ourselves to somebody else who's doing
Hmm.
better or has done better. But you're on your unique path. We are each different. We're doing things for a different reason, and your experience and what got you here isn't the same as anyone else's. So therefore, they might find something easier, and that's okay. And so I think it's thinking about respecting your unique journey. And Angie, I don't know if you have anything to add to those two so far.
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think that you were talking about our brain and how our brain doesn't understand some things. And it's because our subconscious is programmed in a positive way, not in a negative talk way. So you cannot think, I don't want to fail. You need to think, I will succeed, basically, right? Because that's the way the
Right. Yeah.
subconscious works. And I love that example that you have of the what was it, the pilots or the fighters who were doing some
Yes,
training.
with the helicopter.
Yes, how was
Yes.
the example? Yes, tell us the example.
So it's yeah. So they did this study, and they were using pilots from the army, and then they were flying over a big forest, and they were like, don't hit the trees, don't hit the trees, don't hit the trees. And then what happens is they hit the trees because they're focusing. If I tell you, I mean, you've seen this before, right? Don't think of a pink elephant. You're going to think of a pink elephant, right? So it's not telling your brain what not to do. It's
Yeah,
like
it
telling your
doesn't work.
brain what you want to do. Yeah, what you want. So I think, when we focus on failure, it does, yeah, that's what we think about. We think about failing. And so it's
Correct.
how do we
So
reframe that? Yeah. And the
totally.
other thing I think is also how do we shift our language around failure? So it's not like I
Yes.
failed or that failed. It's that didn't go
Mm,
so well.
mm.
It didn't go the way I wanted it to. And I think,
Yes.
Angie, you and I were talking about, like, in science experiments, right? Sometimes they work and then sometimes they don't. And when they don't work, it's like, okay, that one failed. Let's think, what can we learn from that and move on to the next one?
Yes.
And so I think there's a couple of things, and how do we look at the learning in that? If the word failure creates some sort of emotional reaction for you, then use a different word,
Correct.
reframe it. So
Yes.
the two things I've talked about so far is reframing the failure, respecting your unique journey. And the last one that I think can be really helpful in helping us um, be more friendly with failure is focus on gratitude and self-compassion. And, there is a big thing around, how do we be more grateful for what we have? So looking at what you do have, what you have done, and the self-compassion, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and I know I struggle with it as well. So how do we move from what we didn't do to what we did do? And actually, maybe it is just difficult, and it's okay to find something difficult. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means
Mm,
it's a bit hard right now. And giving yourself some pats on the back for the things that you did do well and the things that you did do right. And even if today was a struggle, it's okay. How do we move forward with that? So I think those
yes.
would be the three things that I would say, in terms of
Sometimes
how do we move
we,
from. Yeah,
sometimes
no, sorry. I think
we,
we have some internet issues. We keep talking over each.
yes, we are a bit out of
There's a
sync.
little bit of
Sorry.
a delay. Yeah, go on, Angie. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, when we have talked quite a bit about this piece of self-compassion, because lots of times people kind of confuse self-compassion with kind of being easy or going easy on yourself, basically.
Well, I think it is to an extent, though, isn't it? It is a bit just, why do we need to be so hard on ourselves? I don't, and I think there's a bit of a balance because you don't want to be, you don't want to give yourselves a get out clause for not doing things all the time, like it's not a bit of a, oh, it's fine. Or, I didn't do that today, I'll do it again. And then you keep that rolling for a few weeks. That's not going to make you feel very good about yourself. But I think it's finding that balance between, being focused and intentional about what you want, but at the same time, not being too hard on yourself. So being a bit kinder. And one of the questions I do like to ask myself and other people is, if you were your own best friend, how would you be treating yourself right now? And I
Mm,
think we're more compassionate towards others than we are to ourselves. And so it's just asking that question sometimes can be quite helpful. So
mm,
yeah, I hear
mm.
what you're saying. Yeah, you don't want to be giving yourself a get out clause, but at the same time, you do want to be kind to yourself as well.
Correct. Totally. Okay, so in summary, so failure can be your friend, can it? Can it not?
Yes.
Yes, it can. So what we're saying is that obviously it's all about how you choose to sit with it, to be with it. Again, I totally agree with what you were saying about changing your language if you need to. NLP talks a lot about this, about the type of language that we use with ourselves
Mm,
and with the world that surrounds us. So reframe it like, um how are you with it, and with yourself, basically. Yes, the key is to treat it differently if you're struggling with it. And the key is to appreciate that sometimes some of the biggest gifts are included in this failing. Yes. Okay. So, any last thoughts, Reka, before we close the episode?
No, I just want to say to everyone, thank you for listening. And I
Good.
hope they found this episode useful. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. So, yes, we hope that we found all of these useful, and we know that you are perfectly human, just the way you are. And remember to subscribe, share this episode if you found it interesting, or the podcast with your friends and family. And we'll see you the next time. See you. Bye.
Bye.